I want to just share a very short story about how I met Neil McGahee. I was at College Park Junior High School, and I know that there was a kid that grew up down in Raleigh who later went to LSU. They called him Pistol Pete, and even though he got all the press, even his dad's name was press, but I used to go over and sit on the front row of Lenore Gym, Shuford Gym, and there was this kid over there, I call him a kid, number 22, that displayed the same skill sets and level of playing the game of basketball that Pistol Pete did. And I'll tell you, it was just a joy. Franz Teeter and I used to go over every game, and I was tell you about one play that I particularly remember.
Oh my goodness.
Now this was, I think they were playing Newberry. Newberry was playing really tough ball. They were playing in a man-to-man, and Neil's man went down in the corner, and Neil went around him and tipped it away and started dribbling down. The post man dropped back under to defend him under the basket, and Geach took the ball around his back, through his leg, bounced it off the glass, and went around the defender, picked it up, and put it in.
No.
True story. I asked Francis.
Sit down, Steven.
But let me ask, what has Geach brought to our club? Well, a lot he's brought to our club. You know, if he ever had a microphone in his hand, he owned the room. We know that. If he is introducing a guest of the club or had the program, he owned the room. Very articulate. We also know that he is Stella. And everybody knows that. But one thing he did, and we'll all agree, he did it the Geechie way.
Yeah.
Give it up for Geach.
Thanks, everybody.
Oh, Leah.
Neil, you have graced us with your Irish charm now since February of 2002 when you joined this club.
Yes, we did. That's my sponsor right over there.
Mr. Snipes, right over there, yes. Also, you have been so chivalrous with all of the lassies to give roses whenever they were finishing their presidency or just for congratulations or for anything. And so we think it is time to give back to you. So we are going to thank you and tell you how much we're going to miss you with roses.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
That is the first of several.
Yeah. Thank you, Julie. Thank you.
Neil, we're always going to love you, and nobody will introduce people as
well
as you do.
Okay,
so
well,
thank you.
if you decide to die before I do, let me know.
It's not on my calendar.
Right, I hear you.
Neil, you're a bright light. You're like the
God.
sun.
Oh my God.
And we all orbit around you.
Well, you are the best, baby.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm quite touched.
You might want to put this around.
No, I am.
You've got some briars.
Okay, and I'm speaking for everybody. We're going to all give you a great big kiss because we're so glad you're here today.
Oh my God.
Thank you so much.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
There you go.
Such women. Whoa. I got it. Look on, young lady. My goodness. Thank you so much. Thank you so more than you ever.
Finally returning the favor.
Yeah, and look at you. You are the best. Thank you all. My goodness. Oh, there's no end to it. Madam President. Yes. Well, look at you. No, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
On behalf of all the servers, we will miss you.
You all give me too much, but well, thank you.
I always have a
Thank
cold
you.
Budweiser for you.
You know,
Let's give it up for Neil.
Mr. President, I think he wants to talk.
He wants to talk.
On a personal note, thank you. On a personal note, I am moving to Greensboro
Winston.
on Tuesday, on Monday rather, and this long 14 years as a Rotarian will come to an end. But Charles Snipes, and for all of my fellow Rotarians, you're more than kind, and from the bottom of my heart, and to my friend Nancy, I want to say thank you very much, and Godspeed. Go Rotary.
Neil will be fixed, there's no doubt about that.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Glenn as much time, Actually, I found out about Glennie. My sister is a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, and she heard Glennie speak and suggested that it would be a good program for our club. Glennie Sims is the founder of Normandy Remembers, a nonprofit organization established to educate young people in the United States about the duty of remembrance felt toward American World War II soldiers and veterans in Normandy, France. Glennie is the daughter of a World War II veteran, was born and raised in western North Carolina, and attended Lenoir-Rhyne University. Go Bears. Glennie was recruited by the Patton Foundation, founded by General George Patton's granddaughter, Helen Patton. Glennie served as the director of their U.S. Normandy Remembrance Project, where she worked with schools, civic clubs, press, and municipalities in France, thanking them for their diligence in continuing to honor and remember the American soldiers who took part in the Allied invasion of Europe during World War II. As part of her responsibilities with the Patton Foundation, she also aided in the planning of some of the ceremonies and commemorations marking the 70th anniversary of the D-Day invasion of Normandy. Give it up for Glennie.
Thank you, Bruce. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? First of all, I want to thank you very much for having me today at your meeting. It's an honor for me to be here. Rotary clubs are an organization that I have a lot of respect for, and you have benefited my family. My son was one of the recipients of the Rotary Youth Leadership Award, and he went to Camp Brevard before his senior year in high school, and it benefited him greatly. He came home after the camp, and he was student body president that year, and his life was different when he came home from the youth leadership camp, and I thank you very much for supporting those and for nominating young people to go to those. It made a big difference in his life, and he now has, every summer he gives his life to service, and I think it started because of that, and I thank all of you for participating in encouraging young people. It's very important to me that young people are encouraged to be leaders. I'm here today to talk to you about the people of France and how, let me get my microphone. I'm here today to talk to you about the people of France and how they love our American veterans, especially our World War II veterans, but they love all of our veterans. When I grew up, I heard that French people really didn't like Americans so much. That was sort of a stereotype that I had always heard. And my father, who was a World War II veteran, he had been in France for a little while, but he didn't speak of it. I know there is a World War II veteran in the room today, but I don't know how many others of you had World War II veterans in your family. My father served in the Navy. He signed up right after D-Day, and right after Pearl Harbor, and went to serve. Then he came home after the war, just like most other World War II veterans, and got on with his life. He went to get an education at Lenoir-Rhyne University, got his master's at Appalachian Teachers College then. He became a teacher, and he was a very patriotic man, a very giving man to young people. He's one, back in that day, in the 50s and 60s, I grew up in the 1960s and 70s, my dad would take kids to Washington, D.C. And back then, you didn't take a motor coach like you do now. You know, you have to take a motor coach now, and you stay a few days. My dad would load them up about 2 o'clock in the morning on the old activity bus in Oak Hill, which is a community up in Caldwell County, or in Dudley Shoals, or in Granite Falls, which is where I grew up. And he would take kids to Washington, D.C., and walk around the city all day, go to Arlington and take them to different graves, to President Kennedy's grave, to some people that he knew who had died in World War II, and he would tell them about sacrifice for liberty, that we owe respect to people who sacrificed for our liberty. And of course, being the teacher's daughter, he would drag me along with him. And so I went, every time he went, I went. And I grew up having great respect for the military, great respect for people who had sacrificed for our country. But I never knew my father's own story. He never spoke about the war. And when I was in middle school years or high school years, and we would have World War II projects, and I would ask my dad about his experience in World War II, I thought he was angry at me he would say, I don't want to talk about it, you don't need to know about it. I always thought my dad was angry at me. Looking back as an adult of parents and a parent of kids, I realized my dad was trying to protect me from things, and also that my dad was trying to protect himself from having to say very hard things. He never spoke about his story until the end of his life. Toward the end of his life, he had talked about his best friend during the war, and he wondered if he was still alive. And along came the internet, and my sister and I found his best friend, who had lived in Bowie's Creek, North Carolina, all of their lives. They'd been a couple hours apart. And when they found each other, they spent every weekend together. My dad would go down to his house, or he would come up to my dad's house. And when he came to my dad's house, I always tried to be the token driver, or the babysitter, or the cook, or something like that, and they didn't want me around. They just wanted to hang out. And they would talk, and they would reminisce about things, and my dad began to open up just a little bit to me about some difficult things, but I really just heard the funny things. One Monday night, he called me. He said, I'm ready to talk. I said, really? He said, yes, I'm ready to talk. Would you and the boys, I have 4 children, 2 girls and 2 boys. He said, would you and the boys bring supper over on Thursday night, and we're going to talk? And I said, okay, we'll do it. The next morning, he died, suddenly. So I never heard the words come out of my father's mouth about his story. But more importantly, my father never got the closure of telling his story to his child, which he needed to do badly. And that will probably haunt me for the rest of my life. It was an experience that affected my father profoundly, and he didn't always get a lot of encouragement from his immediate family. And when he died, I found in his wallet a letter that his father had written him when he was in the war that said, I don't care if you're wounded, I don't care if you die, I don't care if you're wounded, I don't care if you experience people dying, I don't care what happens to you. When you come home, you will tell your mother that you are having a veritable picnic. And my dad carried that letter in his wallet all of his life. And what kind of false shame he carried, I don't know. But during my high school years, my family had some problems, and my mother and father divorced. And you know, PTSD wasn't a thing that people talked about after World War II. People just got on with their lives, and you didn't talk about things. And I realized after my father died how important it was that if he could have just talked, if he could have just talked to us. So, let me back up just a little bit. When he began opening up a little bit, he and I planned a trip to Washington, D.C., and then to Normandy, because it was going to be the 60th anniversary of the D-Day invasion in 2004, and also the World War II Memorial was being dedicated in 2004, and my dad was so excited about that thing, and he wanted to see it. So we were going to go there, and then we were going to go to Normandy. We had a big trip planned. And he died before he got to go on either of those 2 trips. So I sort of switched gears in life, and I had raised children, and I had been an accountant, and I decided to just switch gears altogether, and I started working for an educational tour company, putting myself on a motor coach with 5th graders and 7th graders and 8th graders going to Washington, D.C., and living through the torture of taking them all around Washington, D.C., and doing what my dad used to do, because it was important to me that young people understand the price of liberty, to respect our military, to respect our leaders, and to respect our elders. It was important to me for my dad. So I switched gears and did that. However, my daughter and I went on to Normandy that year. And it was just a profound experience for me to see those wide beaches, to imagine what those young, and I have sons who are 24 and 26 now, so if you're 19 years old to me right now, I'm a 55-year-old woman, if you're 19 years old to me, that's a boy. I imagine what those boys felt when they stepped off those boats and looked at those cliffs and saw those guns aiming at them. And I couldn't. It was just so overwhelming. And then I saw the Norman people literally getting on their knees and kissing the veterans who liberated their land. it was a profound experience that I wish my father could have seen and experienced for himself. Fast forward a few years in life, and my grandmother, who had passed away earlier, she had always told I'm the youngest of my cousins. My cousin Joe was the oldest of our cousins, and she had always said to us, she was this little tiny woman, but she was sort of, when she wanted her way, she was sort of like a mafia mom, you know what I mean? She's like about this tall, but she'd point the finger, and she would always say, when all the grandchildren were together, she'd say, I know Glennie will go to France one day and see my brother Carson's grave. I know she will, and I know Joe will. And we'd always just sort of blankly, yes, we will, you know. There was no choice about it. And so my cousin Joe, after this transpired with me going to Normandy, my cousin Joe got cancer and he died. And I realized that he could not fulfill his promise to Grandma, and that it was a very important promise to Grandma, and that my dad never got to open up to me, and I wanted to fulfill my promise to my grandmother. So at my cousin's funeral, I said, I'm going to go and see Uncle Carson's grave, like I told Grandma I would do. Do any of you other grandchildren want to go with me? And one of them raised her hand and said she would go with me. So at 50 years old, we decided that we would go, and I did the college backpacking trip at 50 years old. We just literally had a backpack, and we went to Europe for 3 weeks, and we went to visit our Uncle Carson's grave, and we took some sweet tea and poured on his grave, and some soil from Laurinburg, North Carolina, and some things that my grandmother had wanted put on his grave if we went, and fulfilled our promise to her. And then we made our way down through Calais and Dunkirk, and then we ended up in Normandy for D-Day. And we met some friends, and we had a wonderful time, and again, it was a very profound experience. Some friends that we met invited us to come back in August. They said, it's beautiful here in August. It was very cold in June. They said, it's beautiful here in August. And I had miles on my airline, and so we weren't going to have to pay for a place to stay, and I wasn't going to have to pay to travel, and I wasn't working then, so I thought, well, I'll go back. And my cousin said, sure, I'll go back too. We went back, and we got to the airport, and my cousin ditched me for a man that she had met earlier, and so I was alone in France by myself for 3 weeks, and the first 2 days I sort of sat licking my wounds a little bit and wondering what I was going to do, you know, not knowing what I was going to do, and then I rented a car, and I thought, I'm here by myself, I'm going to learn some things. So I drove around to all the historic sites, and I soaked up as much as I could soak up, and I met as many people as I could meet. And a couple days before I was heading home, I was down by Omaha Beach. I love Omaha Beach at sunset. And I was down by Omaha Beach, and the books that are being passed around, there's a picture of a man, and the caption says a life-changing experience or something to that effect. There was a man standing there, and I kept walking by him, and being the southern nosy woman that I am, I'd walk by and walk by again and walk by again, and he was standing there looking at the water, and I knew he had been there. I knew he was one of the boys that stepped off those boats. I knew he was one of the men those boys that faced those guns. And then I just sort of stood beside of him. He was all by himself. I just sort of stood beside of him a little bit, not knowing what to do. And he looked at me and he said, you know, I always hoped that people here would be happy and free. And it was tourist season, peak tourist season. And I said, they are, look at them, they are. And I said, have you been back in that water since that day? And he said, no. I said, you want to go? And he said, no. I said, okay. So I stood there and stood there. And finally he said, yeah, I think I do want to go get in the water. And so we walked down the beach, and the beach is very wide. And we walked down the beach, and he would turn around and look up at the cliffs. And those boys were trained when they were preparing for D-Day. They were trained to look for church steeples, because every little town has a tall church, and the steeples are all different. So they were trained to look for the church steeples, and when they got off the Higgins boats, that's where they were trained to go, toward those steeples. And he would stop, and he would look up and get his bearings, and he would tell me, this is where so-and-so died, this is where my friend died. And then he would go on, and he would look again, and he would say, this is where I had my gun shot out of my hand, and I had to pick my gun up off my dead friend's hands and use it. This is where I had to pick a body up and shield myself. And then what really got me was he looked, and he stood there for a minute before he could talk, and he said, this is where my best friend died. And he said, I didn't know what to do. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, the tide was going to carry him out to sea, and I didn't know what to do. I knew his body wouldn't be able to go home. I said, well, what did you do? And he said, well, they shot him through the head, and he was bleeding real bad. And I just stood there a minute, and he said, so I did this. And he pulled a little bag out of his pocket, and it was bloody sand. It was dark sand. And he had picked up a handful of sand and put it in his pocket. And when he got somewhere where he could find a bag to put it in, he put it in a bag. And he had carried that with him every day of his life since the war. And sure enough, his friend's body was washed out to sea, and it was never recovered. And that was, he shared some of the sand with their family, and he had some of the sand with him. And that's all he had of his friend. And it was really hard to keep my composure during this point in time, but I thought about my daddy. I thought, this man needs to say some things. So we went on down toward the water, and I took his shoes and socks off and rolled his pants up. And he had a cane, and we got in the water, and the waves were pretty rough that day, so I was holding on to him. And I was trying really hard not to cry. And you guys don't know me, but I'm a big crier. I cry. I'm very sentimental, and I cry. And he stood there, and he cried. And he looked around, and I cannot imagine what was going through his head. But he cried, and then all of a sudden he took his cane and he splashed me. And I didn't quite know what to do. I was a little bit taken aback. I was trying to hold back tears, but then this man splashed me, so I splashed him back. And he splashed me again, and I splashed him back. And I said, we're happy and free here now because of you. And then he started crying a little bit, and then the people who were out on the beach, and there were a lot of them, they recognized what he was. And grown men came up, and they got down on their hands and knees, and they were saying, merci pour ma vie, thank you for my life. Je t'aime, I love you, merci pour ma vie. And they were kissing his hands and kissing up his arms. And women were kissing him all over his face, and little children were coming and hugging him. And at first he cried, but then he started laughing, and he said, I was just doing what I was told to do. And he said, the real heroes are buried up there. And we were down the cliff from the Normandy American Cemetery. But you could tell what an overwhelmingly beautiful experience it was for that man to have those people come and say thank you. And you could tell that they were so sincere. They loved the American liberators and the Canadian liberators and the Polish liberators and the Free French fighters and the English liberators. They love all the people who fought for them. They loved them. So anyway, when he had talked to some people, he said, well, I'm ready to go back. And so we walked back up toward the sidewalk and helped him get his shoes and socks back on. And there were two women sitting there, and one of them I could tell was his wife, and one of them looked sort of mad. And she came up to me and she said, I'm his daughter. And I introduced myself to her, and she said, I probably have never heard the things that my dad just said to you, because he's never talked about it. And I said, well, I bet he will now. And I said, I understand. And I turned around and walked off and went and got in my car and drove away far enough so that they couldn't see me, and just sat and cried for a while. And then I wrote about it on Facebook so that my children at home could see what I had experienced. And that's how the Patton Foundation found me. I don't know what military magazine picked it up, but some military magazine found it and picked it up and put it in a magazine. One thing led to another, and the Patton Foundation called me about a month later and asked me, sight unseen, if I would work with them. And so I began working with them and going to Normandy quite a bit. The second time I went to Normandy, working for them, I was invited to come to a meeting of a group called Le Fleur de Mémoire. And they are a group of wonderful people who adopt soldiers' graves in the Normandy American Cemetery and the Brittany American Cemetery, which are in Normandy. And by adopt them, I mean they adopt those graves. They adopt the men buried in those graves and women buried in those graves. And they don't just adopt them to lay flowers on their graves, they adopt them as a part of their family. If they were an older person than the person buried in the grave, they adopted them as a godson. They'll call him their godson. Some people call him my father, my godfather, my brother. But they adopt them, and it's a lifelong commitment. They go, they find out the history of that soldier, they find out where he died, where he fought, where he came from, what his birthday is. They find out everything they can find out about that soldier, and they'll go lay flowers on the grave. They'll go visit the grave regularly, that's part of their commitment, and it's a lifelong commitment, and it's an inherited commitment. You hand that down to your children. So now there are grandchildren who have adopted graves through Le Fleur de Memoire, and it's a beautiful organization. So I was invited to come to one of their meetings because I was in the Patton Foundation. When I got there, I realized I was the keynote speaker. I did not know that before. So, and there was a table sort of like this, and when I got there, I was looking for my friends, some of my French friends that I knew I was going to go sit with them on. And then I see my name up here, and I asked the president of the club, why is my name up here? And he said, well, you're the featured speaker. Do you have about an hour? And sure. So I didn't, but I didn't know what to do, so I just got up and told my story of why I do what I do. And the people in the room, I never realized this before. I always thought it was just the veterans who had stories that they'd never told. I thought it was just the veterans who fought, who had stories that they kept inside. I never really considered the citizens who lived through the war. I never really considered the citizens who were children and lost their parents, or lost their homes through the bombings, even the American bombings. I never considered what they had kept inside. And so when I got up and started talking, because I didn't know I was going to speak, I think I became overwhelmed with emotion, and I cried. And because of that vulnerability, I think there were some people in the audience who trusted me, maybe. Showing emotion when you speak is not really a cool thing to do, and it's not really a French thing to do, but they trusted me. They began to trust me. And so they would invite me to come, and they would say, would you like to get, you didn't get your father's story, would you like to get my story? And I would say, yeah, I would love to get your story. And so it started out that I had a little list of maybe 5 or 10 people that I would go to their homes and visit them, and I would eat with them, and they would have a table set for the American soldier. Every meal they have a place set for the American soldier. They thank, in their prayer and their blessing, to ask God to bless their food, they thank God for their liberators and then their food. They tell me that, universally, they tell me that the soldiers who liberated them sacrificed, Jesus, and they say, Jesus sacrificed to save my soul. The soldiers who came here sacrificed for my liberty. And they put them up on a pedestal.
Images that she's taken, as well as some of the other images she's taken around the Southeast.
So Friday night, 400 seats in the auditorium we want to fill up, and then Saturday morning from 9 to 1, 24 slots to be photographed. And she provides a free print too for the vet if they want.
Doesn't cost anything for
A digital version or printed version.
printed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, today's raffle was $72 for a grand total of $689. We have 43 cards and 2 jokers left.
And I'm putting $1 in the bucket because I forgot let everybody make their announcements today. So I apologize for that. It wasn't on purpose, I promise. While they're drawing that, Mark Garrison isn't here to pick up half his bingo money, so I guess he wants to donate. There he is, back in the corner. I didn't see you. You just sit over there. Like for you makes it up. Mark, I got your check. See me afterwards, if you can catch me. 2952 were the last 4. 2952. All right. David, we've got a correct one. It's a spade, but a 6. Free lunch. I want to thank you for the great program today. Student guests, thank you for joining us. Thank you for singing. And we have a membership committee meeting. There's another. Now I owe another $1. Linda wanted me to remind everybody there's a membership committee meeting right after this, right in here, correct? So, I think that's everything. Let's close with the 4-way test. Of the things we think, say, and do.
Is the truth, is it fair to all concerned?